The dust clouds hadn't settled from the cattle drive when Marcus Whitfield knew his luck had finally run out. Standing in the doorway of his weathered ranch house, he watched the last of his herd disappear over the ridge, sold to pay debts that seemed to multiply like prairie grass after rain. The Lazy W Ranch, his father's legacy and his own life's work, was slipping through his fingers like sand through a broken hourglass. At 32, Marcus had the weathered hands and sun-beaten face of a man who'd spent his entire life working the unforgiving Texas plains. His dark hair, streaked with premature gray, hung low over eyes that had seen too much hardship for someone so young. The banknote in his shirt pocket felt heavier than a branding iron, its words burned into his memory. Final notice, 30 days, foreclosure. He'd fought drought, disease, and rustlers, but the one enemy he couldn't rope and brand was time itself. The sound of approaching hooves made him look up from his brooding. Sheriff Tom Bradley rode up the dusty path, his badge catching the late afternoon sun. Behind him rode two other men Marcus didn't recognize, their faces grim beneath their hat brims. "Marcus," Tom called out, dismounting with the careful movements of a man whose bones ached from too many years in the saddle. "Got some business to discuss with you." "If it's about the mortgage, Tom, you know I'm doing everything I can. Got 30 days left, and I aim to use every one of them." Tom shook his head, removing his hat and running his fingers through thinning hair. "Not about that, son. This here's federal business. These gentlemen are from the Territorial Marshal's office." He gestured to the two men, who remained mounted, their eyes scanning the ranch buildings with professional thoroughness. The taller of the two men leaned forward in his saddle. "Mr. Whitfield, we have a proposition for you. Name's Marshall Davis. This is Marshall Cole. We understand you're facing some financial difficulties." Marcus's jaw tightened. Bad news traveled faster than wildfire in cattle country, and it seemed his troubles were now common knowledge. "I don't take charity, Marshall." "Not charity," Davis replied, his voice steady and businesslike. "A job, the kind that pays well and quick. We've got ourselves a situation in the territorial prison up north. Prisoner transport that needs handling, and we need someone with your particular skills." "What skills would those be?" Marshall Cole spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly from years of tobacco and dust. "Horse training, breaking wild ones. Word is you've got a gift with the difficult animals." Marcus felt a chill despite the Texas heat. "You want me to break horses for the prison, not horses," Davis said quietly. "A person, a young woman, to be exact, goes by the name of Wild Rose McLean, though most folks just call her Too Wild. She's been in our custody for 3 years now, charged with horse theft, cattle rustling, and association with known outlaws. The judge was inclined toward hanging, but certain circumstances have led us to consider alternatives." The world seemed to tilt slightly around Marcus. "You want me to break a woman like she's some Mustang?" "She's not just any woman," Cole interjected, his eyes hard as flint. "She's been through 12 different facilities, and everyone has sent her back. She's violent, uncontrollable, and has escaped more times than we can count. The territorial governor is looking for someone who can civilize her, give her a chance at a normal life instead of the gallows." Tom Bradley cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Marcus, they're offering enough money to save the ranch, enough to pay off the bank and give you a fresh start. All you have to do is take her in for 1 year, teach her how to be a proper lady, and keep her from running off or causing trouble." Marcus stared at the three men, his mind reeling. The idea was beyond bizarre, taking in a female outlaw like she was a wild horse to be broken. Yet the alternative was losing everything his family had built over 2 generations. "What exactly am I supposed to do with her?" "Treat her like family," Davis said. "Give her work to do, teach her domestic skills, help her learn to live among civilized folks. The only conditions are that she doesn't leave the ranch without supervision, and at the end of the year we evaluate her progress. If she's successfully reformed, she gets a clean slate. If not," he shrugged. "And if I refuse, then she hangs," Cole said bluntly. "Judge gave her one last chance, and this is it. You're her final option, Mr. Whitfield." The weight of a life hung in the balance, and Marcus felt it settle on his shoulders like a yoke. He'd always prided himself on being a man of principle, but principles didn't pay mortgages or keep family legacies alive. "How much money are we talking about?" $5,000, Davis replied. "Half now, half when the year's up, assuming she's still here and reformed." $5,000. More money than Marcus had seen in 5 years. Enough to not just save the ranch, but to rebuild it properly, buy new stock, repair the buildings that were falling apart. It was salvation wrapped in the most unlikely package imaginable. When would this start? Tomorrow, Cole said. We've got her in a wagon about a mile back. Figured it was better to discuss terms before bringing her in. Marcus looked out over his land, at the pastures that would soon belong to strangers if he didn't act. His father had built this place with nothing but determination and dreams, and now his son was being asked to trade those dreams for the responsibility of reforming a woman the law had given up on. Bring her in, he said finally, but I want it understood that I run things my way. No interference from you or anyone else. If she's going to learn to be civilized, it'll be on ranch terms, not prison terms. Davis nodded, agreed. We'll check in monthly, but otherwise she's your responsibility. The marshals rode off to fetch their prisoner, leaving Marcus alone with Tom Bradley. The sheriff studied his old friend with concerned eyes. You sure about this, Marcus? That girl's got a reputation that'd make a rattlesnake nervous. They say she's killed men. They say a lot of things, Tom. Most of them turn out to be half-truths at best. Marcus squared his shoulders, trying to project more confidence than he felt. Besides, how wild can one woman be? He got his answer 20 minutes later when the wagon rolled into his yard. Even from a distance, he could hear the commotion, shouting, cursing, and what sounded like someone kicking the wooden sides of the wagon with considerable force. As it drew closer, the cursing became clearer, and Marcus found himself both impressed and appalled by the creative combinations of profanity echoing across his property. The wagon stopped in front of the house, and Marshal Cole jumped down from the driver's seat, his face flushed with exertion and frustration. She's been like this for 3 days straight, he said, breathing heavily. Near kicked a hole through the side of the wagon. Davis approached the back of the wagon cautiously, keys in hand. Miss McLean, we're going to remove your restraints now. I trust you'll behave like a lady. The response was a string of curses that would have made a cavalry sergeant blush, followed by more kicking. Davis looked at Marcus with an expression that seemed to say, last chance to change your mind. Marcus stepped forward. Let me see her. The wagon's canvas cover was pulled back, revealing the most extraordinary sight Marcus had ever witnessed. The woman inside was small in stature, probably no more than 25, with wild auburn hair that had obviously not seen a proper brushing in months. Her clothes were men's clothing, worn leather pants, a torn shirt, and boots that had seen better decades. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. They were the color of emeralds and blazed with a fury that seemed to burn right through him. She was chained hand and foot, but even restrained, she radiated a kind of fierce energy that was both frightening and mesmerizing. When she saw Marcus, her struggles ceased for a moment, and she studied him with the wariness of a cornered wildcat. You the fool they found to babysit me? She asked, her voice rough from shouting but unmistakably feminine. I'm Marcus Whitfield. This is my ranch, and for the next year it's going to be your home? She laughed, a sound without humor. Home? Mister, I ain't had a home since I was 12 years old. This is just another cage with bigger walls. Marcus turned to the marshals. Remove the chains. I don't think that's wise, Davis protested. She's been known to bolt the minute she's free. Where's she going to go? Marcus asked, gesturing at the endless expanse of prairie surrounding them. Nearest town is 30 miles and she's on foot. Remove the chains. Reluctantly, Davis unlocked the restraints. The moment she was free, Wild Rose McLean exploded from the wagon like a coiled spring. For a second, Marcus thought she was going to run, but instead, she stood in his yard, slowly turning in a circle, taking in her surroundings with those calculating green eyes. Not bad, she said finally. Seen worse prisons. It's not a prison, Marcus said quietly. It's a ranch. There's a difference, she snorted. Only difference I see is the size of the cell. The marshals didn't linger. They clearly wanted to be away from Wild Rose McLean as quickly as possible, and Marcus couldn't blame them. After they rode off, he was left alone with his charge, unsure of what to do next. You hungry? He asked finally. She looked at him suspiciously. Why? Because it's dinner time and I was planning to eat. Figured you might want to join me. What's the catch? No catch, just food. Marcus started walking toward the house, then paused. You coming, or would you rather stand in the yard all night? After a moment's hesitation, she followed him, though she maintained a careful distance, like a wild animal accepting food from a human for the first time. The inside of the ranch house was sparse but clean. Marcus had lived alone for 2 years since his wife died of fever, and he'd maintained the place more from habit than from any real care about appearances. Wild Rose stood in the doorway, surveying the main room with its stone fireplace, simple furniture, and the photographs on the mantel. "That your family?" she asked, nodding toward the pictures. "Some of them. My parents, my wife." Marcus moved to the kitchen, trying to keep his voice casual. "You can sit anywhere you like." She remained standing, watching him prepare a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. "Your wife, she die?" Fever took her. 2 years of kids? No, never had any. Marcus set 2 plates on the table. "What about you? You have family?" Her laugh was bitter. "Had him once. She died when I was 10. Never knew my pa, but I got his name. McLean, that's about all he left me." They ate in silence, Wild Rose wolfing down her food like someone who wasn't sure when the next meal might come. Marcus found himself studying her surreptitiously. Cleaned up? She'd probably be pretty, maybe even beautiful. But there was something feral about her, something that spoke of years of hardship and survival on the margins of civilization. "So what's the plan, cowboy?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "You going to try to turn me into some simpering lady who curtsies and serves tea?" "I'm going to try to help you stay alive," Marcus replied honestly. "Beyond that, I haven't figured it out yet." His bluntness seemed to surprise her. "Most folks who try to reform me got all sorts of ideas about proper behavior and Christian virtue. I'm not most folks. And I'm not particularly interested in reforming anybody. I figure people are what they are." "Then why'd you take the job?" Marcus set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Because I need the money, and you need a place to stay that's not a prison cell or a grave." Seemed like it might work out for both of us. She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he was telling the truth. "What do you expect from me?" "Same thing I'd expect from anyone living on my ranch. Pull your weight. Don't steal from me and don't burn the place down. Other than that, I don't much care what you do. No rules about how I dress or talk or act. You dress however you want, talk however you want, and act however you want, as long as it doesn't interfere with the work or put anyone in danger." Wild Rose leaned back in her chair, clearly not believing what she was hearing. "There's got to be a catch. Men like you always got an angle. Men like me, respectable men, property owners, the kind who think they know what's best for everybody else." Marcus considered this. "Maybe some do. I just know what's best for me, and what's best for me right now is keeping this ranch running and staying out of other people's business. If you want to be part of that, fine. If not, that's your choice." That first night, Marcus showed her to the small room off the kitchen that had once been intended as a nursery. It had a bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the horse pasture. Wild Rose examined it like she was checking for escape routes, which she probably was. "Door lock from the outside?" she asked. "New bars on the windows?" "New." She turned to face him, confusion evident in her expression. "Why not?" "Because you're not a prisoner here, you're—" Marcus paused, unsure how to define what she was. "You're someone who needs a place to stay for a while, that's all. And if I run, then you run. But you won't get far on foot, and the nearest town is 30 miles through some of the hardest country in Texas. Plus, if you run, they'll just catch you and hang you. Seems like staying might be the smarter choice." She sat on the edge of the bed, testing its firmness. "How do I know you won't try something in the middle of the night? Most men who offer shelter to women want something in return." Marcus felt his face flush with anger, not at her but at whatever experiences had taught her to expect the worst from men. "Because I give you my word, and my word means something. The door has a latch on the inside. Use it if it makes you feel safer." He left her alone then, going to his own room at the other end of the house. As he lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of the prairie wind and the distant call of coyotes, Marcus wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Wild Rose McLean was nothing like what he'd expected. She was smarter, tougher, and more damaged than any woman he'd ever encountered. The marshals had been right about one thing: she was definitely wild. But there was something else there, something that reminded him of the Mustangs he'd spent years gentling. Beneath the wildness was pain, and beneath the pain was a spirit that had refused to be broken despite everything life had thrown at it. The next morning, Marcus woke to find Wild Rose already up, standing in the kitchen doorway staring out at the sunrise. She'd apparently found some of his wife's old clothes, because she was wearing a simple dress that, while too large for her small frame, was at least clean and appropriate. Her hair had been braided back, and for the first time, Marcus could see her face clearly. She was beautiful, but it was a hard beauty like a diamond that had been cut by rough handling. "Sleep well?" he asked, moving to start the coffee. "Well enough. Your horse has been carrying on all night, though. Something's got them spooked." Marcus paused in his coffee preparation. "How do you know about my horses?" "Window faces the pasture. Watched them for hours." "You got a problem with that paint mare. She's favoring her left front leg, and the bay gelding's got colic symptoms. Might want to check on them." Marcus stared at her. He'd planned to check on the horses after breakfast, but he hadn't noticed anything wrong with them the day before. "You know horses. Know them better than I know people. Been around them all my life." After breakfast, they walked out to the pasture together. Sure enough, the paint mare was limping slightly, and the bay gelding showed all the signs of mild colic. Wild Rose slipped through the fence rails with fluid grace and approached the animals with a confidence that surprised Marcus. The horses, which had been skittish the day before, calmed immediately under her touch. "This mare's got a stone bruise," she said, running her hands down the paint's leg with expert skill. "Nothing serious, but she needs a few days' rest. The gelding just needs to move around some. Too much rich grass too fast." Marcus watched, amazed, as she handled his horses with a natural ability he'd rarely seen. "Where'd you learn to do that?" "Told you, been around horses all my life. Mima worked for a horse trader when I was little. Then after she died, I sort of inherited the knowledge, you might say. The marshals said you were arrested for horse theft." Wild Rose's expression hardened. "I never stole a horse in my life. Borrowed a few when I needed to get somewhere fast, but I always left them where they'd be found and cared for. Horses deserve better than most people give them." Over the following days, Marcus began to understand that Wild Rose McLean was not the simple criminal the law had painted her to be. She worked harder than any hand he'd ever hired, rising before dawn to tend to the animals and working until sunset without complaint. She had an intuitive understanding of ranch work that came from years of experience, and she approached every task with a competence that spoke of someone who'd learned to be self-sufficient out of necessity. But it was with the horses that she truly came alive. Marcus had always considered himself skilled with horses, but watching Wild Rose work with them was like watching an artist with a brush. She could calm a spooked animal with a touch, diagnose problems that would have taken Marcus hours to identify, and communicate with the horses in ways that seemed almost mystical. "You ever think about training horses professionally?" he asked one evening as they watched her work with a young stallion that had been giving Marcus trouble for months. "Think about it. I've been doing it. How do you suppose I survived these past 10 years? She ran her hand along the stallion's neck, and the animal, which had been fractious and difficult, stood quietly under her touch. "Most folks who wanted difficult horses worked with didn't much care where I came from or what my reputation was, long as I could deliver results. Then how'd you end up in trouble with the law?" Her expression darkened. "Wrong place, wrong time, wrong people. Story of my life." It was another week before she told him the whole story. They were sitting on the porch after a long day of work, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Wild Rose had been quieter than usual, and Marcus had learned to recognize the signs that she was wrestling with something. "You want to know what really happened?" she asked suddenly. "Only if you want to tell me." She was quiet for a long moment, then began to speak in a voice barely above a whisper. "I was working for a man named Jack Brennan, training horses for his ranch up near Fort Worth. Good work, good pay, and he left me alone to do my job. But Brennan was mixed up with some bad people, rustlers and outlaws who used his place as a hideout." She paused, her hands clenched in her lap. "I didn't know about any of that, not at first. I just trained the horses and minded my own business. But then one day, the law came looking for Brennan and his associates, found me there with a bunch of horses that turned out to be stolen, and figured I was part of the gang." "Weren't you?" "No. But try explaining that to a judge when half the town thinks you're some kind of wild woman who runs with outlaws. Brennan and his real partners were long gone by the time the law showed up, and I was the only one left to take the blame." Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest, the same anger he'd felt when he learned about the corrupt cattle buyers who'd cheated him, or the bank officials who turned a blind eye to their wealthy customers while squeezing small ranchers. "So they railroaded you? Gave me a choice. Hang, or spend my life in prison. Then, after 3 years of being shuffled from one prison to another, they came up with this idea. Reform the wild woman, turn her into a proper lady, and maybe she won't have to die after all. That's why you don't trust people. People let you down. Horses don't. Marcus understood that sentiment better than she knew. After his wife's death, after the series of misfortunes that had nearly cost him his ranch, he'd found it easier to trust in the things he could control: his land, his animals, his own hard work, than in the promises and good intentions of other people. But as the weeks passed, Marcus began to realize that wild Rose McLean was teaching him something about trust that he'd forgotten. She kept her word about everything, no matter how small. When she said she'd finish a task, it got done. When she promised to look after an animal, it received the best care possible. When she gave her opinion about something, it was honest and straightforward, even when it wasn't what people wanted to hear. More importantly, she was teaching him about resilience. Despite everything that had happened to her, the loss of her mother, years of hardship, false imprisonment, and the constant threat of execution, she hadn't let life break her spirit. She might be scarred and wary, but she was still fighting, still hoping, still capable of kindness toward the animals in her care. It was that kindness that finally broke through Marcus's own emotional walls. One morning, he found her in the barn with a newborn foal that had been rejected by its mother. She was feeding it by hand, talking to it in soft, gentle tones that he'd never heard her use with humans. "Mama doesn't want anything to do with him," she explained when she noticed Marcus watching. "Sometimes that happens. Mare gets spooked during birth, or the foal doesn't smell right to her, and she just turns away. Will he make it? If somebody cares enough to put in the work, needs feeding every few hours, day and night, for the next few weeks, then we can start him on grain and teach him to be independent." Marcus watched her with the foal, saw the gentle patience in her movements, the soft expression on her face that transformed her from the hard, wary woman he'd first met into someone tender and nurturing. "You're good with babies. All babies, not just human ones. They're all the same, really. Need food, warmth, and someone to care whether they live or die." That night, Marcus woke to the sound of movement outside his window. Looking out, he saw Wild Rose making her way to the barn, a bucket in her hand for the foal's midnight feeding. She'd been doing this for 3 days now, getting up every few hours to care for an animal that wasn't even hers, on a ranch where she was essentially a prisoner. Something shifted in Marcus's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his wife died. It wasn't just attraction, though he was honest enough to admit that Wild Rose McLean was the most fascinating woman he'd ever encountered. It was something deeper: respect, admiration, and a growing sense that fate had brought them together for reasons that had nothing to do with reform or money or saving his ranch. The next morning, he found her asleep in the barn, curled up in the straw next to the foal's stall. She looked younger in sleep, less guarded, and Marcus felt a powerful urge to protect her from whatever had put those shadows in her eyes. "Rose," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She came awake instantly, alert and ready for trouble, a reflex that spoke of too many years sleeping in dangerous places. "Something wrong?" "Just checking on you and the foal." She looked embarrassed. "Must have dozed off. Won't happen again?" "Why not? You've been up every few hours for days. You're exhausted. Can't let the little one die." Marcus knelt down beside her in the straw. "Rose, you don't have to do this alone. I can help with the night feedings." She looked at him with surprise. "You'd do that?" "Of course. It's my ranch, my horses. I should be helping. Most men would just let nature take its course. Say it's not worth the trouble." "I'm not most men." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. Wild Rose McLean, who trusted no one and depended only on herself, was learning that Marcus Whitfield was different from other men she'd known. And Marcus, who had closed his heart after his wife's death, was discovering that the woman the law had labeled as too wild might be exactly what his lonely life needed. The foal thrived under their combined care, and as the days grew longer and warmer, Wild Rose began to change in subtle ways. She smiled more often, laughed at Marcus's awkward attempts at humor, and gradually began to share stories of her life that went beyond the hardships and disappointments. She told him about the beautiful wild horses she'd seen in the mountains of New Mexico, about the kindness of a Mexican family who'd shared their food with her when she was hungry, about the sunset she'd watched from a hilltop that was so beautiful it made her cry. In return, Marcus shared his own stories: his childhood on the ranch, his parents' dreams of building something lasting, his wife's death, and the loneliness that had followed. They talked while they worked, during meals, and in the evenings on the porch, and Marcus realized that he hadn't felt this comfortable with another human being in years. It was during one of these evening conversations that Wild Rose asked the question that had been hanging between them for weeks. What happens when the year is up? Marcus. He'd been dreading this moment, because he honestly didn't know. The marshals would return to evaluate her progress, and if they deemed her sufficiently reformed, she'd be free to go anywhere she wanted. If not, she'd face the gallows. But there was a third possibility that Marcus had been thinking about more and more as the weeks passed. "I don't know," he said finally. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to stay here," she said quietly, not looking at him. "I know that's probably not possible, and I know you didn't sign up for a permanent arrangement, but this is the first place I've ever felt like I belonged." Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen. "Rose, I've been thinking the same thing. This ranch needs someone who understands horses the way you do, and I need someone who understands me the way you do." She turned to look at him then, her green eyes bright with hope and fear in equal measure. "You mean that?" "I mean it. But there's something I need to tell you first." Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that what he said next could change everything between them. "I'm not just talking about a business arrangement. I'm talking about more than that. More. I'm talking about marriage, Rose. I'm talking about making this your home, really and truly, for as long as you want it to be." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Wild Rose stared at him with an expression he couldn't read, and Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "You don't even know me," she whispered finally. "I know enough. I know you're honest and hardworking and kinder than you let people see. I know you've got more courage than any 10 men I've met, and I know you care about things that matter. What else do I need to know? You know what I've been accused of. You know my reputation. I know what people say about you, and I know what I've seen with my own eyes. The woman I've been living with for the past 2 months is nothing like the woman in those wanted posters." Wild Rose stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, staring out at the darkening prairie. "What if the marshals don't agree that I'm reformed? What if they decide I'm still too wild? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Rose, regardless of what they decide, I want you to know that I love you. I love your strength, your spirit, your gentleness with animals, and the way you've brought life back to this place. I love the woman you are, not some reformed version of her." She turned back to him, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too, Marcus. I never thought I'd be able to say that to anyone, but I do. I love you, and I love this ranch. And I love the life we've been building together." Marcus stood and crossed to her, taking her in his arms for the first time. She felt small and fragile against his chest, but he knew that was an illusion. Wild Rose McLean was as strong as the Texas wind and twice as enduring. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," she whispered against his shoulder. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher, with Sheriff Tom Bradley and his wife as witnesses. Wild Rose wore Marcus's mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her small frame, and she'd never looked more beautiful. As they exchanged vows in the simple ceremony, Marcus thought about how drastically his life had changed in just a few short months. He'd started the year facing the loss of everything he cared about, and now he had more than he'd ever dreamed possible. The marshals arrived for their monthly visit the day after the wedding, and Marcus felt Rose tense beside him as they rode up to the house. Marshal Davis dismounted with his usual businesslike manner, but Marcus thought he detected something different in the man's expression. "Mrs. Whitfield," Davis said, tipping his hat to Rose. "Congratulations on your marriage." "Thank you, Marshal. We've come to complete our evaluation. The territorial governor wants a full report on your progress." Marcus stepped protectively closer to his wife. "She's done everything you asked and more. She's worked hard, caused no trouble, and integrated completely into ranch life." "I can see that," Davis replied, and Marcus was surprised by the warmth in his voice. "Mrs. Whitfield, the governor has asked me to inform you that based on the reports we've received, and based on what we've observed today, your case is being closed. You're a free woman with all charges dropped and your record cleared." Rose swayed slightly, and Marcus caught her arm to steady her. "Free, completely free. The governor was particularly impressed by the letters of recommendation we received from several prominent citizens who've had dealings with your horse training business." What horse training business? Marcus asked, confused. Marshall Cole smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had ever seen from the man. Word gets around in cattle country, Mr. Whitfield. Your wife's been quietly training horses for ranchers all over the territory through correspondence and recommendations. Some very influential people have spoken up on her behalf. Rose looked as stunned as Marcus felt. I just helped a few people with problem horses. Nothing formal. Formal enough that you've got a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in Texas. The governor believes that someone with your skills and reputation deserves a chance at a normal life. After the marshals left, Marcus and Rose sat on their porch in the golden light of late afternoon, holding hands and trying to absorb what had just happened. We're really free, Rose said, her voice filled with wonder. After all these years, I'm finally free. Well, both are, Marcus replied. Free to build whatever life we want together. Rose looked out over the ranch, their ranch now, with eyes that held dreams instead of just survival. I want to expand the horse training operation. Build proper facilities, maybe take on some apprentices. There are a lot of young people out there who need a chance, just like I did. Marcus smiled, thinking about the future they were planning together. Whatever you want to do, we'll do it together. As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Marcus reflected on the strange turns life could take. He'd agreed to take in a woman called Too Wild, out of desperation and financial necessity. But Wild Rose McLean hadn't needed to be tamed or reformed. She'd needed to be understood, respected, and loved for exactly who she was. In the end, she hadn't just saved his ranch, she'd saved his heart, his future, and his faith in the possibility that two people could find each other across the vast loneliness of the frontier and build something beautiful together. The foal they'd saved together was now a strong, healthy young horse, running free in the pasture with the rest of the herd. Like Rose herself, he'd needed only care, patience, and the chance to prove what he was truly capable of becoming. As they sat together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Marcus knew that their story was just beginning. Wild Rose McLean Whitfield was still wild in all the ways that mattered, wild with passion for life, wild with love for the animals she cared for, and wild with dreams for the future they would build together. She was wild, but she was his, and he was hers, and together they would ride into whatever adventures the frontier had in store for them. The woman who had been too wild for civilization had found her perfect match in a man who understood that sometimes the wildest hearts are the ones most worth winning.